I didn't plan to stay long. That was the promise I made to myself while I parked on the curb and listened to the noise spilling out of my sister's backyard. Music, laughter, the scrape of plastic chairs on concrete. A normal Saturday family BBQ, the kind that's supposed to feel easy. I stepped through the gate with a paper bag of store-bought buns and a bottle of iced tea. Nothing fancy. I never bring anything fancy. It just complicates things. My sister Melissa was already in host mode. Sunglasses on, phone in hand, calling out instructions like she was running a small operation. Burgers on the grill, kids running between adults, someone arguing about sports near the cooler. It was loud, in the way families get loud when they think everything is fine. I nodded to a few people, exchanged quick hellos, and took a seat near the edge of the patio. I like edges. You can see what's coming from there. I was wearing jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and the bracelet I always wear when I'm off duty. It's not flashy, just a simple metal band worn smooth in places. I don't talk about it. I don't explain it. I don't need to. Melissa spotted me and waved me over like she just remembered I existed. "You made it," she said, like it was a surprise. I said I would. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It never does. We've had different definitions of success for most of our lives, and mine has never impressed her. I handed her the bag. She glanced inside and laughed. "Buns," she said. "You're so practical it hurts." I shrugged. "They're buns." That should have been the end of it. We were standing near the table when she noticed the bracelet. I saw the shift before she moved. The look that means she's bored and looking for something to poke at. She reached out without asking, not a gentle touch, not a tap. She grabbed my wrist and pulled it closer, like she was inspecting a cheap watch at a yard sale. "What's this?" she said loud enough for people nearby to hear. I didn't pull away right away. I didn't say anything either. I've learned that reacting too fast just gives her more to work with. She turned my wrist, squinting at the metal. "Did you get this from a flea market?" A few people laughed. Not cruel laughter, casual laughter, the kind that says they don't think much of it either way. Melissa smiled wide or encouraged. She gave the bracelet a little shake. "I mean, look at it. It's so basic." Then she laughed again. A short, sharp laugh, like she'd landed a joke she'd been holding on to. I felt the bracelet shift under her fingers. A small sound followed. Metal against metal. A click that wasn't supposed to happen. She froze for half a second, then looked down. The clasp had come loose. "Oh," she said. "Oops." She let go of my wrist like it had burned her. The bracelet slipped, caught for a moment on my skin, then dropped to the concrete. It landed with a dull sound. Not loud enough to stop the music, but loud enough for me to hear it clearly. Nobody rushed over. Nobody apologized. Someone near the grill said something about needing more plates. Melissa glanced down at it, then back at me. "Guess it wasn't built to last," she said. "Cheap stuff never is." I bent down and picked it up. The clasp hung open, bent just enough to matter. I turned it in my hand once, then closed my fingers around it. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I felt calm, clear, like something had just clicked into place. "It's fine," I said. Melissa shrugged, already distracted by someone calling her name. "You can probably get another one," she said over her shoulder. "Next time, try a real store." I straightened up and stepped away from the table. I didn't look around to see who had noticed. I didn't need to. Family gatherings have a way of filing moments like that away without comment. I moved to the side of the yard where it was quieter and leaned against the fence. The music sounded farther away from there. I rolled the bracelet in my palm, feeling the familiar weight of it. People like to think moments like this are about the object. They're not. If it had been a cup or a chair or a cheap watch, it wouldn't have mattered. It was the way she did it, the way she felt entitled to my space, my things, my silence. This wasn't new behavior. It was just louder than usual. Melissa has always been comfortable taking attention, taking credit, taking help. When we were kids, she was the one teachers remembered. I was the one who filled in the gaps. When she needed something fixed, I fixed it. When she needed something covered, I covered it. When she needed someone to step in quietly so she could keep moving forward, that was usually me. Over time, that role hardens. People stop seeing the effort. They just see the result. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket and checked my phone. No messages, no emergencies. The world hadn't ended because my sister laughed at me in her backyard. Melissa was back near the grill telling a story with big gestures. People leaned in. She was good at that, always had been. I stayed where I was, watching the scene like I wasn't part of it. The longer I stood there, the clearer something became. Not anger, not sadness, recognition. This wasn't about a joke gone too far. It was about a pattern that had finally stopped blending into the background. I took a slow breath and pushed off the fence. There was nothing left for me to say here. I grabbed my keys from the table, nodded to no one in particular, and walked back toward the gate. Behind me, someone laughed again. The music picked up. The party continued without missing a beat. I closed the gate quietly and headed for my car, the bracelet resting heavy in my pocket. As I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, I turned the key once then again, letting the engine idle while I stared through the windshield. The noise from the BBQ faded as I pulled away, replaced by the quiet hum of the road and the familiar pressure behind my eyes that comes when something old gets stirred up. Melissa and I grew up in the same house, but we didn't grow up the same way. She was 3 years older, which in our family translated to louder, bolder, and automatically in charge. By the time I was old enough to notice, she had already claimed the center of every room. She was the kid teachers remembered by name. The one who spoke up, cracked jokes, and somehow always ended up in front of the class. I was the one they asked to pass out papers. Reliable, quiet, useful. At home, it was the same pattern. Melissa needed help with homework, so I helped. Melissa forgot her lunch, so I shared mine. Melissa broke something, and I explained it away before anyone noticed. It wasn't forced. No one told me to do it. I just learned early that things ran smoother when I filled in the gaps. Our parents liked harmony. They liked the idea of a close family. Harmony, in practice, meant avoiding conflict with Melissa. She took up a lot of space, and it was easier for everyone if no one challenged her. When she wanted something, she found a way to frame it as reasonable. If that didn't work, she framed it as urgent. If that didn't work either, she framed it as emotional. By the time we were teenagers, she had the system down. I learned a different set of rules. Don't ask for much. Don't make a scene. Don't add weight to an already crowded room. Melissa went through phases. Sports one year, theater the next. Every new interest came with big declarations about her future. She was going to be great. She was going to be noticed. She was going to leave this town behind. I listened. I nodded. I adjusted my plans around hers. When it came time to think about life after high school, Melissa announced she wanted something exciting, something impressive, something that sounded good when she said it out loud. I didn't announce anything. I filled out paperwork. The military wasn't a dramatic choice for me. It was practical. Structure, benefits, a clear path forward, a way to leave without making a speech about it. When I told the family, the reaction was polite confusion. Melissa laughed. "You?" she said. "That sounds intense. It's a job," I said. She waved it off. "I just don't see you doing that." "You're not exactly tough." She didn't mean it as an insult. That was the problem. She said it like a fact everyone already agreed on. I left anyway. While I was learning how to follow protocols and keep my opinions to myself, Melissa stayed close to home. She tried a few different things. None of them stuck for long. There was always a reason. A bad boss, a boring role, people who didn't recognize her potential. When she met her husband, the family treated it like a turning point. Stability, they said, direction. I watched from a distance and hoped it would be true. By then, I had settled into my own routine. Early mornings, clear expectations, a system where doing your job well actually mattered. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make good stories at parties, but it worked. I didn't talk much about what I did, not because it was secret, but because it didn't translate well. Logistics, contracts, compliance, the kind of work that only gets noticed when it goes wrong. Melissa didn't ask. She didn't need to. In her mind, if I wasn't posting about it or talking it up, it couldn't be that important. Over the years, the requests started small. Could I look over a form? Did I know anyone who might be hiring? Could I explain a process that didn't make sense to her? I helped when I could. It felt natural, familiar. What changed was the assumption. At some point, the requests stopped sounding like questions. They started sounding like expectations. When something worked out, it was treated as luck. When it didn't, it was treated as my fault for not trying harder. Melissa's tone never shifted. It stayed light, joking, dismissive. That made it harder to call out. You can't argue with someone who insists they're just kidding. The bracelet wasn't the first time she'd crossed a line. It was just the first time she'd done it without covering it up as concern or humor that everyone was supposed to laugh along with. As I drove, I thought about how many times I'd smoothed things over for her, how often I'd stayed quiet to keep things comfortable for everyone else, how easy it had become for her to see me as background. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the pressure behind my eyes had settled into something steadier, not anger, not resentment, clarity. I went inside, set my keys on the counter, and took the bracelet out of my pocket. The clasp was bent just enough to remind me it wasn't indestructible. I set it down carefully and washed my hands like I was clearing something off me. Melissa didn't see me as weak. She saw me as safe, someone she could poke at without consequence, someone who would absorb the impact and keep things moving. That had worked for a long time. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, then turned off the kitchen light and walked toward my desk, already aware that the way I looked at my family had shifted in a way that wasn't going to reverse itself. I pulled a chair out from under the desk and sat down without turning on the overhead light. The room was quiet in the way I prefer, no background noise, no notifications asking for attention. I set my laptop open and logged in not to do anything urgent, just to ground myself in something familiar. Most people hear military and picture noise, boots, weapons, shouting. My days don't look like that. They look like schedules, emails, contracts that need to be clean enough to survive scrutiny. I work in logistics and compliance. If a process breaks, it's my job to find where and why. If a rule exists, it's my job to make sure we follow it. It's not exciting. It's effective. I didn't fall into this role by accident. Early on, I learned that the people who keep things moving don't get applause. They get responsibility. I was good at reading systems, good at seeing how one decision ripples through 10 others. That skill compounds over time. So does trust. I don't talk about that at family gatherings. When someone asks what I do, I keep it simple. I handle logistics. If they push, I say paperwork. It's accurate enough to end the conversation. Melissa never pushed. She decided a long time ago that my life was small, that I traded excitement for safety, that my quiet meant limited. Once she made that call, everything else filtered through it. The fact that I lived alone, that I drove a reliable car instead of something flashy, that I didn't post about promotions or trips. To her, those were signs. In my world, they were choices. I work with people who measure words carefully because a sloppy sentence can cost real money. I sit in meetings where no one raises their voice because there's no need to. The authority in those rooms isn't loud. It's documented. Melissa lives in a different economy, one where visibility matters more than substance, where being seen counts as doing something, where tone can outweigh facts if it's confident enough. That difference didn't bother me for years. We were operating in parallel lanes. The problem was the overlap she never acknowledged. I've been asked more than once how her husband landed certain opportunities. I never answered directly, not because it was secret, but because it wasn't my story to tell. I didn't make calls behind closed doors or pull strings. I wrote references when asked. I verified credentials. I vouched for character when it was appropriate. That's how it works. Quietly, officially, on record. Those references carry weight because I don't hand them out casually. My name means something in the circles I move in, not because of rank, but because I don't sign off on things I wouldn't stand behind if questioned. Melissa never asked what that meant. She just accepted the outcomes. I scrolled through a few messages, cleared a couple of notifications, and closed the laptop. The workday was over. This wasn't about work. It was about perception. People like my sister think power announces itself, that it shows up dressed well and speaks loudly. They mistake restraint for absence. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. No makeup, hair pulled back, the same face I've had for years, the same posture. Nothing about me reads impressive unless you're trained to notice what matters. I've spent my career learning when to speak and when to stay out of the way. That instinct doesn't shut off just because I'm related to someone. It's why I didn't say anything at the BBQ. Not because I was hurt, because reacting would have fed the version of me Melissa already believes in. I took the bracelet from the counter and turned it over under the light. The metal caught just enough to show the scuff along the edge. I ran my thumb over it once, then set it back down. This bracelet has been with me through deployments, inspections, long nights, waiting for numbers to line up the way they were supposed to. It's never been about style. It's a reminder of standards, of what happens when you do your job right and don't need anyone to clap for you. Melissa doesn't understand that language. She hears silence and fills it with her own assumptions. I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, letting the cold settle. The thing about systems is that they don't care how someone feels. They care whether procedures are followed, whether boundaries are respected, whether conflicts are declared. Those are neutral rules. They apply to everyone. I hadn't thought about my family in that context before. I'd kept those worlds separate out of habit, out of convenience, out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. Standing there, it became clear that separation had blurred without me noticing. Not because I crossed a line, but because I allowed others to lean on it without understanding the structure underneath. That realization didn't come with drama. No spike of emotion, just a quiet recalibration. I rinsed the glass, set it in the rack, and walked back to the desk. The room felt different now, not heavier, sharper, like a decision had been made without needing to be announced. I powered down the laptop completely and slid the chair back in. The bracelet stayed on the counter exactly where I'd placed it while I moved through the apartment with the steady sense that the way I showed up for work, for family, for myself, was about to get more precise. I opened the drawer at my desk and pulled out a thin folder I hadn't touched in months, not because I forgot about it, but because I didn't need to look at it to know what was inside. Receipts, emails, confirmations, the kind of paper trail you keep when you don't like surprises. I spread the contents across the desk and stood there, arms folded, reading through things I already knew by heart. The first time I helped Melissa as an adult, it felt temporary, a bridge, not a foundation. She and her husband were between jobs. Rent was late. Stress was high. I wired some money and told myself it was a one-off. It wasn't. There was the loan to cover a security deposit when they found a better place. The money for a short course that was supposed to open doors. The emergency payment when a car repair turned into a full replacement. Each time, there was a reason. Each time, it made sense in isolation. I never wrote checks with expectations attached. I never said, "You owe me." I didn't want leverage. I wanted things to be stable. Stability has a way of turning invisible. The help shifted from financial to logistical. Melissa would call with a problem and an assumption built in. "You know how this stuff works. You're good with paperwork. Can you just take a look?" I took a look, then another, then another. Her husband's resume went through 3 drafts on my screen. I didn't embellish. I corrected, tightened language, removed claims that couldn't be backed up. When he asked for a reference, I didn't hesitate. He had the experience. He just needed someone willing to put their name next to it. That name was mine. People think references are casual. They're not. Not where I work. When I vouch for someone, I'm saying I trust them to represent standards I'm accountable for. That trust doesn't come free. Melissa never asked what it cost. The opportunities that followed were treated like luck. Good timing, right place, right moment. She told friends about how things just worked out like the system had noticed them on its own. I let that story stand. When paperwork came in late, I reminded her. When deadlines were missed, I nudged. When questions came up about process, I explained. Over time, my role shifted again. I wasn't just helping, I was maintaining. Maintaining appearances, maintaining access, maintaining momentum. The problem with being good at maintenance is that people stop noticing the work. They only notice when something breaks. I sat down and started stacking the papers into neat piles. Financial support, professional support, administrative support, 3 categories, all of them familiar. What struck me wasn't the amount. It was the expectation that had grown around it. The way requests had become statements. This needs to be handled. We can't afford delays. You'll figure it out. Not once had Melissa asked if it was still okay. Not once had she checked whether it put me in an awkward position. In her mind, I was a fixed part of the equation. That's what happens when someone only sees outcomes. I thought back to the BBQ, to the way she reached for my wrist without asking, the confidence behind it, the certainty that there would be no pushback. It wasn't just about the bracelet. It was about ownership, about access. She didn't think she was crossing a line because she didn't believe one existed. I slid the folder back into the drawer and locked it. Not because I needed to hide anything, because I was done leaving it open out of habit. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. A photo of the grill, a joke about leftovers, a comment about how I disappeared early. No mention of the bracelet, no acknowledgement of anything awkward. That was normal for her. Discomfort made her restless. If she ignored it long enough, it usually went away. I replied with a thumbs up and put the phone face down. At work, the day moved like any other. Meetings, reviews, a call about timelines, a discussion about compliance updates. I took notes, asked questions, and followed through. In the afternoon, I received an email from a colleague asking about a reference I'd provided months earlier. Routine check-in, nothing urgent. I read it twice before responding. The words I typed were neutral, accurate, professional. I didn't add anything. I didn't remove anything. I answered the question that was asked and closed the thread. When I sent it, I felt something shift. Not satisfaction, not relief, just alignment. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store on the way home and bought the same basics I always do. Nothing that needed a second thought. At home, I cooked, cleaned, and put the bracelet back on my wrist once the clasp was adjusted enough to hold. The metal sat where it always had, warm against my skin. Melissa called later that night. I let it ring out, not out of spite, out of choice. I didn't owe an immediate response just because she expected one. I went to bed early and slept without interruption. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Short messages, casual assumptions, a request framed like an afterthought. I responded when necessary. I stayed quiet when it wasn't. By the end of the week, I could see the outline clearly, not of a confrontation, but of a boundary that had been missing for a long time. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't require a speech. It only required me to stop filling in the spaces Melissa had grown used to leaving open. I moved through my routines with the same discipline I bring to everything else, aware that consistency is what holds systems together and that removing it even carefully changes the balance whether anyone wants it to or not. I adjusted the clasp again that morning, pressing it closed with my thumb until it caught. It held barely, but that was enough. I didn't wear the bracelet for comfort. I wore it because it belonged there. People assume meaning lives in price tags. They look for brands, shine, weight. This bracelet doesn't offer any of that. It's plain, functional. It looks like something you'd overlook on a cluttered counter. That's why Melissa felt so comfortable laughing at it. I didn't get it from a store. I didn't pick it out. It was issued. The day it was handed to me wasn't ceremonial in the way movies make things look. No speeches, no flags. A short room, a few chairs, a table with paperwork stacked neatly. My commanding officer said my name, confirmed my unit, and placed the bracelet in my hand like it was just another piece of gear. In a way, it was. The bracelet came after a stretch of work that never made headlines, no dramatic footage, no public praise. We moved supplies where they needed to go, when they needed to be there, without anyone noticing. That's the goal. When logistics works, nothing looks heroic. It just looks normal. Someone in our unit didn't make it back from that rotation. Not in a cinematic way. No last words. Just a call, a report, a process that keeps moving because it has to. The bracelet carried the unit code and a date. That was it. No one explained what it meant. They didn't need to. If you were there, you knew. I've worn it since. Not every day. Not to prove anything. Just often enough to remind myself what standards look like when no one is watching. It's easy to be disciplined when people are paying attention. It's harder when the work is invisible and the costs are abstract. That's why the comment at the BBQ landed the way it did. Not because she called it cheap, because she reduced something earned to something disposable. Melissa didn't ask where it came from. She didn't wonder why I'd keep something so unremarkable. She decided its value based on appearance and stopped there. That's her pattern. Quick judgment, loud conclusion. I don't correct her because explanations don't land with people who don't care to hear them. At work, we're taught to separate personal attachments from operational decisions. Feelings can cloud judgment. I'm good at that separation. It's one of the reasons I've lasted as long as I have. But personal attachments don't disappear just because you compartmentalize them. They sit where you put them, waiting to be acknowledged. That afternoon, a junior officer asked me about the bracelet. Not directly, just a glance, a pause. Is that? I nodded once and kept moving. He didn't ask again. That was enough. I didn't tell my family any of this. Not before, not after the BBQ. I didn't need them to understand the bracelet to respect it. Respect doesn't require context. It requires restraint. Melissa showed neither. She texted me later that day, a link to a sale. Thought you might want an upgrade, she wrote, a laughing emoji. I didn't respond. I wasn't offended. I was done engaging at that level. The bracelet isn't a symbol of loss to me. It's a record of showing up, of following through, of doing the job without expecting gratitude. Those values don't translate well at backyard parties. That evening, I took the bracelet off and set it on the counter while I cooked. I washed my hands, moved methodically, cleaned as I went. The bracelet stayed where I placed it, catching the light when I passed. I thought about how often Melissa confuses visibility with importance, how she measures worth by reaction. If something doesn't get a response, she assumes it doesn't matter. In my world, the opposite is usually true. The most important work is the work no one wants to talk about because it doesn't make a good story. It doesn't flatter anyone. It just keeps things from falling apart. I ate, cleaned up, and put the bracelet back on before leaving the apartment to take out the trash. The metal was cool against my skin. Familiar, grounding. On the way back inside, I ran into a neighbor. We exchanged a few words about the weather. Nothing personal, nothing heavy. I prefer it that way. Back upstairs, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Melissa. "You're being weird," she wrote. "Did I do something?" I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, then set the phone down without replying. It wasn't my job to educate her. It never had been. I'd just taken on that role because it filled a gap and kept things smooth. The bracelet doesn't exist to smooth things over. It exists to remind me what happens when standards are upheld consistently, even when it's inconvenient. I checked the clasp one more time before bed. Still holding good enough. Lying there in the dark, I didn't replay the BBQ. I didn't imagine confrontations or clever responses. That phase had passed. What stayed with me was simpler. The certainty that I wasn't obligated to explain my life to someone who treated it like a punchline, and the quiet understanding that some things only reveal their weight when someone tries to toss them aside like they don't matter. I woke up before my alarm and stayed there staring at the ceiling until the room came into focus. No rush, no weight on my chest, just a steady awareness that something had settled. At work, we call it clarity. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that shows up when the noise drops out and the facts line up on their own. I showered, dressed, and left the apartment on time. Same route, same coffee, same badge at the gate. Nothing about the morning looked different from the outside. That was the point. The difference showed up when I sat down and opened my inbox. A message from Melissa sat there from the night before. Short, casual, the kind of message designed to pull me back into the old rhythm. I read it once and archived it. Not ignored, archived. There's a distinction. Ignoring is emotional. Archiving is procedural. I spent the first hour reviewing a set of updates that had nothing to do with family. A supplier had changed a timeline. A document needed revision. A compliance note required acknowledgement. I handled each item, moved it to the right place, and closed it out. That's how I work. One thing at a time, no shortcuts. Somewhere between the second meeting and the third email chain, I noticed the quiet, not silence quiet, the absence of background tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. For years, a part of my attention had been reserved for Melissa. A constant readiness to step in, to smooth something over, to answer a call, to anticipate a problem before it became public. That channel was empty now. The realization didn't come with guilt. It came with relief. I ate lunch at my desk and watched people move through the hallway. Everyone had their own priorities, their own pressure points. No one was thinking about my sister. No one expected me to fix anything that didn't belong to me. I thought about the difference between obligation and habit, how easily the two get confused when you've been useful for a long time. Melissa never asked me to be responsible for her outcomes. She just grew accustomed to them being handled, and I let that slide because it felt easier than explaining why I wouldn't. That's on me. In the afternoon, I pulled up the ethics guidance we review every year, not because I needed a refresher, but because I wanted the language in front of me. Conflicts of interest, disclosure, recusal, sponsorship, clear terms, clear lines. None of it was new. It was just finally relevant. The military doesn't care about intentions. It cares about alignment, about whether your personal relationships interfere with professional judgment, about whether you can step back when proximity creates risk. I'd always told myself my family and my work were separate. That belief had been convenient. It had also been incomplete. I didn't make any calls. I didn't send any messages. I read. I took notes. I closed the document. When I stood up to leave for the day, I felt lighter. Not because I decided anything dramatic, but because I'd stopped carrying something I wasn't required to hold. On the drive home, I let traffic move at its own pace. No music, no phone calls, just the road and the rhythm of it. The bracelet rested against my wrist, warm, now familiar. I thought about how often I justified staying quiet by calling it maturity, by telling myself that choosing peace meant absorbing disrespect, that letting things slide was the same as being above them. It's not. Peace comes from boundaries, not from erasing yourself to keep other people comfortable. That distinction matters. At home, I set my bag down and changed out of my uniform. I cooked something simple and ate standing up, then washed the dishes and put them away. The apartment felt orderly in a way that matched my head. Melissa called while I was drying the counter. I watched the phone light up, then go dark. She called again 10 minutes later. I didn't pick up, not to punish her, to interrupt a pattern. When I finally sat down, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line at the top of the page. Clear, direct, no explanation. I don't owe access just because someone is related to me. That wasn't a declaration. It was a standard. Standards don't need to be announced. They just need to be enforced consistently. I closed the notebook and set it aside. Tomorrow would look like today. Meetings, reviews, decisions that don't show up on social media. Melissa would continue assuming I'd step in. That assumption had power only as long as I supported it. I checked the clasp on the bracelet without thinking and felt it hold. It didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be secure. Before bed, I set my phone to silent and placed it face down, not because I was avoiding anything, but because I didn't need outside input to validate a decision I'd already made. Lying there, I didn't replay conversations or plan speeches. I didn't rehearse explanations. The urge to justify had passed. What remained was simple and steady. The understanding that doing nothing was no longer neutral, and that choosing not to intervene was in itself an action. I slept through the night without interruption, the quiet holding firm, not as a pause before something else, but as the sound of a system finally operating the way it was designed to. I started the morning by clearing my calendar. Not everything, just the space I needed to think without interruptions. I didn't rush. Rushing is how mistakes happen, and I wasn't interested in creating problems I'd have to clean up later. At work, decisions stick when they're clean, when they're documented, when they're boring enough to survive scrutiny. I pulled up the guidance again, then the file where I keep my own notes, dates, contacts, prior disclosures, everything in order. I wasn't looking for justification. I was checking alignment. The line between personal and professional isn't a suggestion where I work. It's a rule. If you're close to someone whose career intersects your professional sphere, you disclose it. If your name adds weight to an outcome, you acknowledge that influence. If there's even the appearance of leverage, you step back. I'd done that before in other contexts without hesitation. This wasn't different. It just felt different because of who was involved. I drafted a short disclosure. No emotion, no backstory, just facts, relationship, nature of prior involvement. Request for recusal going forward. I read it once then again and sent it through the proper channel. It took less than 5 minutes. The system responded the way systems do, quietly, efficiently, without commentary. An acknowledgement, a note that my disclosure had been received, a reminder that any future involvement related to the parties named should be avoided. That was it. No alarms, no dramatic pauses. No one asked why. They didn't need to. The process isn't there to assign blame. It's there to prevent conflicts before they cause damage. Next, I handled the references. This part required more care. References aren't retroactive. You don't pull them like you pull a plug. You clarify scope. You step out of the way. I reviewed what I'd provided months earlier. It was accurate at the time, still accurate. I didn't retract it. I didn't add anything either. I sent a brief follow-up noting that I would no longer serve as a point of contact or professional sponsor for future considerations. Clear, professional, final. I didn't copy Melissa. I didn't notify her husband. That would have turned a procedural step into a family argument. My responsibility wasn't to manage their feelings. It was to manage my role. By mid-morning, everything that needed to be done was done. I went to a meeting about supply timelines and took notes. Someone asked a question. I answered it. The room moved on. That's the part people don't understand. Real consequences don't announce themselves. They show up later disguised as policy. At lunch, my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. "Hey, can you call me when you get a chance?" I looked at it, then locked the screen and set the phone aside. In the afternoon, I reviewed a contract amendment and flagged a clause that didn't sit right. It was small, easy to miss. I sent it back with a note asking for clarification. No tone, just precision. That's my default. It keeps things clean. On the drive home, I stopped at the grocery store and picked up a few things I'd forgotten earlier in the week. Standing in line, I noticed how normal everything felt. No spike of adrenaline, no sense of dread. If I tried to explain my decision to someone outside my world, they might have expected a confrontation, a moment, a speech. That's not how this works. This wasn't about making a point. It was about removing my weight from a scale that had been tilted without my consent. At home, I changed clothes and made dinner. Simple, efficient. I ate and cleaned up without thinking about it. The apartment stayed clean because I kept it that way, not because anyone expected it. Melissa called again while I was drawing the last plate. I let it ring. When I finally sat down, I opened my email and saw a message from a colleague. A brief update, a procedural question. I replied with a,